Okay, so socialism, as I was discussing, I even went so far as to mention that the police force can be again. So let me back up and kind of just remind us where we're at with this. And then I'm going to weave this all in at the end of this lecture here, and hopefully it'll be more clear, even if right now it's not really. So again, let's go back to the capitalism. Capitalism is when you have privately owned businesses. So Rockefeller, Carnegie, definitely that's a good example of capitalism. Okay, right? And so those are industrialists, guys that have big business operations, but it can be a small capitalist. I owned a small coffee shop and a hair salon at one time, very small. Technically, I was a capitalist, but that's the very wide range of. We're talking about business. We're talking about the most micro, small business, right? In a sense, you can even say that the little girl or boy who's selling lemonade at a lemonade stand, that's capitalism, right? Okay. It's about the markets or the free markets. And remember that laissez-faire capitalism, or the idea of laissez-faire, was to have no governments, the idea of having no governments regulate the economy. Now, socialists believe that the workers believed, and there's a long, complex set of ideas that they make an argument about, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. But ultimately, they feel that the workers have certain inalienable rights, if you will. And the idea then would be that there would be publicly owned industries would be important. We're at a time where these ideas are more of a concept on paper than they are being implemented in the world just yet. Okay? Although you could argue that there's pockets. So remember, there was no communist revolution right now in Russia yet. Okay, we're covering the 1865 to 1900. So you have a lot of ideas. You don't see much government regulation. There's even child labor in America, which we're going to talk more about. All this kind of stuff. So these are ideas that are a response to capitalism's excesses, okay? And they became very popular even with people like Helen Keller. I have this picture here. She comes at she's only is about 10 years old about the time of this chapter ends time-wise. But that's the woman who couldn't hear or see, became famous. Yes, she was very active in socialist politics for an early part of her life. And I'm just kind of showing you how popular socialism was and has been with different groups of people. Now, what then is a communist? Here's where it's confusing. Every communist is a socialist, but not every socialist is a communist. Okay, every communist is a socialist, but not every socialist is a communist. Okay, now what's that mean? Communism's goal is that all business be ran by the people, meaning the state, essentially. Okay, so when you had a communist revolution, the bulk of the economy was ran by the state. It's called a central economy or command economy. Believe it or not, coffee shops even. So it's not how I told you that we have public schools, and this, Modesto Junior College is a socialist institution, but imagine if then the gas station, the baker, the clothes manufacturers all ran by the state. That was the goal. The idea is that workers would take control of the state, and then the state would be ran in the name of the workers. Okay, and again, I'm not here to debate about how that ends up looking or what you can think about that. But communism is basically ultimate socialism. The majority of people who've claimed socialism or call themselves socialists, just like, let's say, Bernie Sanders does now, is they're actually not anti-capitalist. They just believe that there's certain fundamental parts of the industry that should be socialized. So, for example, in Europe, almost every nation, maybe every nation, has socialist medicine. Canada does the same way. So Obamacare is not socialism. Obamacare is forcing us to go to the private sector, to capitalists, to get insurance. Okay, so Obamacare is not socialism. That's a misunderstanding. Okay, socialism is like what happens in France or Britain with the British National Health Service. Um, Basically, you pay high taxes and you have zero cost for medical. You don't have insurance. You don't pay any bills on your medicine for anything. Now, there are debates if that's good or bad. I'm not going to resolve that right here. I just want you to understand these terms right now, okay? So, socialists usually meant free. They wanted free education, even college if possible, and medical. That's the main things that socialists talk about, and socialists tend to focus on workers' rights. Okay, so if certain political parties have been in favor of the business class, the socialists are always in favor of the working class, no matter what branch of socialism they are. Okay, what gets a little bit confusing at time, or can be add to the confusion, is communists will often say, and people still believe in communism, by the way. Anyhow, a communist will say that they're a socialist, and socialist says they're a socialist, but then, North Korea says that they're socialist, but North Korea and what Bernie Sanders wants or what the European socialists want are different in many ways. Okay, so just know that. Now, lastly, there is anarchism, and anarchism there's so many different branches of this. They basically don't believe in the state. They believe that all state power and authority is by its very nature corrupt and has no right to exist. So a police force, a military, and a government that tells people what to do is to them awful. And capitalism is seen as exploitive as well. So a lot of anarchists would be considered socialists, but they don't want the state controlling anything. They want the workers to have direct control. We barely have any examples of anarchism except in the 1920s in Spain, which we may be able to cover a little bit later. And it got snuffed out. But they actually did work somewhat, and it's always kind of in memory now. For anybody who claims anarchism, they kind of have this romantic, this kind of honeymoon period that Spain enjoyed with some examples. But in any case, they actually believe in even having not policing. They just believe it's more like localized politics. So anarchists believe in social order. They just don't believe it should be done up top. And in a certain sense, you could argue that Americans have a kind of strong anarchist thing about them. I mean, if you look at with the even some of the far right groups that have these militias that they don't want the government in their business. They want to be left alone to their guns and their farms. There's a kind of anarchistness there, right? But they wouldn't maybe see themselves as that way, okay? And so these ideas all were very popular. And by the way, while anarchists and communists have tended to be anti-religion, anti-God, seeing religion and the idea of God as a kind of ideological force to oppress the masses, that's how a lot of them viewed things. I mean, Karl Marx said that religion is the opium of the masses. In Anarchism, Bakunin said that Voltaire wrote that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. And he said, but I say if God exists, it's necessary to abolish him. Oh my God, he really said that. So we're talking about passionately anti-authoritarian. Okay, anything with authority, in other words. Okay. Now, on the other hand, there were a lot of Christian socialists. And you might be shocked if you look up the person who wrote, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to which it stands, okay, right? Was a Christian socialist pastor. And it was controversial even then in a certain sense, but there was this time. And why? So you might have thought that I went a little bit too far off track for this chapter. No, what I want to show you, because we look into the labor unions and the IWW, International Workers of the World, and you're going to look at these different ideas. and the Haymarket affair. These kind of ideologies grow out of the wealth disparity and the chaos from the time periods in which we're talking about. The rise of industrialization at the expense of the majority of the workers. And it wasn't clear if there was going to be any equilibrium necessarily, right? Now we have so much consumerism mixed with wealth disparity that, you know, what people really want or what they think about these things, it gets a little bit unclear. So I basically wanted you to know that these things are always going to be topics, and they're going to be an obsession basically from this point of our chapters till now. Because once the Soviet Union takes power, and we're coming up close to that, right? Because we're going to end this chapter at 1900. It's going to be World War I is when we're going to see the first communist revolution, where these ideas actually get implemented into a state that was already always on the outs with the rest of Europe, which is Russia. The greatest fear, anytime workers revolt, is this idea that we could have a revolution here in the United States. And you know, sometimes the labor movement was violent and sometimes not. All unions were not necessarily socialist, communist, or anarchist, but anarchists, socialists, and communists have all gravitated towards unions because they're pro-worker. Remember that? The Communist Manifesto ends with "Workers of the world unite." So, you know, it's an interesting legacy. It comes up a lot. This, like I said, it may still be a little confusing to you. I would like you to call up and ask me if you want more clarification, because I promise you the majority of Americans they could barely come to terms with these terms if a gun was put to their head, but they'd all tell you, or a good chunk of them, that socialism and communism and anarchism are evil. But if you ask them to define these things, good luck. Actually, I'd like to make you a little challenge. Next time you go to a dinner, find out how many people I've heard these terms and see how many of them actually even come close to a definition based on anything that I just discussed. And yeah, you know, and feel free to call me up and let me know what the answers were. Maybe you have a very educated group of people you're around and they know. But my suspicions are not a lot. Okay, that's it for this section. We're moving on.